Okay, she works full-time for Ocean County Cultural Heritage Commission. In her past, not too distant past, she worked for the state park system at Bass River State Forest and also Double Trouble State Park. And Julia is one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to the cranberry industry in South Jersey, in particular, Double Trouble. So, happy to introduce Julia. Before you start, she'll be back in September. She's been working on a presentation on the camp followers during the Revolutionary War. And I think we're going to be the first ones to see it.
Yeah.
So we'll be the first one to see it in September.
Yeah, even before the county event as a county program, doing it here first. So unfortunately, you all have to be my guinea pigs for that one. But
I'm going to try to get the music turned on.
Oh.
Otherwise, we're going to talk really loud.
Didn't notice. Hi everybody, it's me again. Last time I presented here was on the Revolutionary War clothes. Like Mike said, the next time I'll be presenting is on the camp followers, talking a little bit about what the women that followed the Washington's Army did during the wartime at different encampments, and also some special cases of the ladies that dressed in uniform and did some really incredible things. My husband and I just went to New Orleans for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and the National World War II Museum has a traveling exhibit on women in American wars, and some of the ladies that I'm presenting on were even in that museum, so that'll be fun. Like Mike said, I worked for the state parks before I worked for the county. I did work for Bass River briefly, but a majority of my time was at Double Trouble State Park in Bayville. And I was a seasonal historian, doing tours of the cranberry bogs, packing house, sawmill that's there, and doing historical research. So a lot of this is it's kind of Double Trouble centric, but I tried to keep it a little bit broad. My husband also worked with me there, so we're a little bit biased in favor of that one park, but I'm trying to keep it broad. So a little bit about the cranberries. They are a native fruit to New Jersey, particularly the Pine Barrens. They get their name from their flower here, so before they have fruit, they have these really pretty tiny little white pinkish flowers. When the first Dutch settlers arrived in this area, they encountered the cranberries in Massachusetts, and they thought they kind of looked like a crane's neck and head with a little beak. So they called it a cranberry. And when that got anglicized, it went to cranberry. And eventually they just dropped the E. So that's where they get their name. Once they start to bear fruit, it starts off with these itty bitty little lime green berries, and they gradually turn into their iconic red color. An interesting thing that I learned while I was at Double Trouble is that cranberries today that we consider ripe are not to the standard that they were considered to be ripe in the 50s and 60s. But because of global warming and changing temperatures here in New Jersey, our berries don't turn as deep red as they used to. It really takes like really crisp fall days where the temperature is pretty low and the humidity is also pretty low. And we just don't have that anymore. So the berries that we buy today that we consider to be ripe, if you showed them to somebody in 1958, they would throw them away and say, these are not ready yet, why are we selling these? So, cranberries in the Lenape, just briefly. Cranberries have been consumed for hundreds of years. Including by the native Lenape people of southern New Jersey and the Delaware Water Gap region. They were considered a symbol of peace by the Lenape. And there's a famous story that Chief Packaminson exchanged cranberries with some of the first white settlers that he encountered in New Jersey as a symbol of goodwill and peace and friendship. They also used them for medicinal purposes, and they also used them to dye clothing red. So, speaking of Chief Packaminson, if anybody's heard of Packham Pond at Brendan Burns State Forest, this is probably the reason why Packham Pond is called Packham Pond, after the Lenape word for cranberry, because they are everywhere, all along the banks if you walk around the lake, or the pond rather. About the first Thanksgiving, cranberries were served at the first Thanksgiving. However, cranberry sauce is a really generous term for what they ate, because during the time of the first Thanksgiving, sugar had not arrived in America yet. So what the Pilgrims and the natives were consuming was really something like a cranberry paste, just ground up berries with no sugar. They are extremely bitter fruits, so I can't imagine that it was a super pleasant thing, but they did in fact eat them, if nothing else, just to symbolize friendship between the two groups. Health benefits of cranberries, there are so many. They are considered a superfood, and they have just about any health benefit that you would associate with blueberries, being a good source of antioxidants. Cranberries are going to have most of the same benefits because they grow in extremely similar environments. They're almost the same genetically, and they even grow at the exact same pH level. So at Double Trouble, for example, there was at one time a blueberry industry at Double Trouble, and what the workers would do in the cranberry packing houses was take the berries that were not ripe for consumption, and they would just send them to the blueberry fields and put them at the base of the plants because the pH was perfect for growing blueberries. So they're really, really similar fruits. Both of them are native to New Jersey because of our dry, sandy soil and our really high water table. And they both also really like acidic soil, which all of our soil really is. So they've been found to be a great source of antioxidants. They're really big seller is that they're really good for kidney health. They're a main ingredient in any treatment for the urinary system, kidneys. They're great for that. They've been found in a few studies to slow the progression of cancer cells. They help with digestion. They're an anti-inflammatory. They are very good for you until you add sugar to them, unfortunately. If you want them to do anything beneficial for your health, you can't add sweetener because it neutralizes pretty much all of their effects. So if you can handle just a really small half a glass of straight juice, you're probably going to get some benefits, but you're really going to have to choke it down. It does taste like medicine to eat them raw. So like I said, the pine barrens are perfect for cranberries and blueberries because we have these perfect conditions. We have sandy soil, and we also have very loose soil. If you're familiar with our white sand that we have down here in the pine barrens, us locals call it sugar sand. That sand is really high in silica, which is also perfect for glass making, which is why Batstow had a successful glass works and places like that. They also like acidic soil because they are acidic fruits. And our water is also highly acidic. The more you hear about the pine barrens in detail, the less and less of a hospitable place it sounds like. We have loose soil that's not really good for growing any crops. We have acidic water, acidic soil, and a high water table. But it's perfect for just about anything, any fruit that you consider bitter will like to grow here. So in recent decades, Jersey has become become famous for our tomatoes, highly acidic. Our blueberry, that's our state fruit, highly acidic, kind of bitter. We also have native blackberries and things like that. So the less sweet stuff really loves it here. Okay, so cranberry farming in Ocean County. By the late 1800s, Ocean County, not just New Jersey, but specifically Ocean County, was producing a quarter of the entire nation's cranberry crop. The whole country. A quarter of it came from pretty much right here. A lot of farms were overseen by locals, but we're gonna get into more detail about the people that actually worked the farms. They were migrant workers that mostly came from Philadelphia. Some major producing farms include Cloverdale and Barnegat, which is a county park that you can visit. If you want to talk about the expert on cranberry history, talk to Patty at Cloverdale. She will give you the best tour ever. They also have some equipment that you can see that still works when we go over some of the tools. She can show you all that there. And then of course Double Trouble, and there was Bud Farm in Pemberton, which was a pretty big producer as well. The first recorded attempt to grow cranberries commercially was in 1845. These pictures, this one is Cloverdale, this one is Double Trouble, and this one I found in the National Archives website, and I don't think it was labeled, so I'm not entirely sure where that one is. There's also White's Bog, of course, but White's Bog is usually more well known for being the birthplace of the first commercially grown blueberries, but again, if you have good conditions for one of those fruits, you have good conditions for the other one. So originally cranberry harvesting was done dry. Today we think of the Ocean Spray commercials where the guys are standing in like hip deep water. They say they're not adding sugar, and then they proceed to dump like half a bag in the water on accident. I never really understood that commercial, but that's the image that we're used to seeing today, is the wet harvest method. But originally this is what the harvest looked like. Just a bunch of people picking the berries one at a time. It's really high intensity labor. You're bent over all day. A lot of times the season starts in September. They are a fall fruit, so it's still hot out sometimes here in New Jersey. Was not a great time. So, like humans tend to do, we tried to make it easier by inventing some tools. So these are called cranberry scoops. The idea of them is that you hold it by this long wooden handle, and then you're going to put your other hand at the bottom or the base of it, and you're going to rake it through the cranberry vines. These metal tines on the box are going to knock the berries off their vines, and then the idea is that hopefully the berries roll into the box and they don't fall out. That sounds really great, except for a couple of issues that made them really inconvenient. They're really heavy. One of my dad's first jobs was cranberry picking. He will never choose to use one of these, ever. He said that they were just back-breaking, the biggest waste of time. They're not a fan favorite. They also pick up a lot of what's called chaff. Chaff is like weeds and dried up old vines that are dead already, stuff that you don't want in your berries that you're going to have to pick out later before you sell them. They also, while they're picking up that chaff, they also had a tendency to rip the whole plant out by the root if you got it just the right way, and now next year your crop is going to suffer. They're kind of finicky, so if you scoop through the vines and you don't hold it just the right way, you can end up just knocking the berries off and then flinging them out in front of you, and now they're all on the ground. So because of that particular issue, we got the wet harvest method. This is the image that we're probably more familiar with. Because these cranberry scoops kept knocking the berries onto the ground, And these farmers had all this crop that was going to waste and was not bringing in money. They needed a way to get those berries off the ground and into the market. So what they did was they came up with the idea to fill the bogs with water. I think I have a picture of it someplace. Maybe I don't. Cranberries are filled with these little air pockets. If you see this in the bottom right, they each have 4, and they make them buoyant, so they float in water. So once they figured that out, they said, why don't we just flood the bogs, and then everything that did fall off is going to float to the surface, and we can just corral them wherever we want them to go. There were a couple different stages of that process, so we'll talk about that. Again, they're a fall fruit. You have to get them after they're ripe, but before the first frost of the season, because after that they're all done. You won't get any good ones after that point. So I mentioned that the workers that came to actually pick the berries in the field, they were migrant workers. They came from Philadelphia. They were pretty much, for the majority, they were mostly Italian descent from Philly, around 9th Street, Market Street area. So they would come down for the season. They would bring the whole family, mostly because when you came to work in a cranberry company town, you were kind of living in this little self-contained village that was completely reliant on the industry. So you're going to have a store, for example, a general store to serve you while you're living in the village. That store, 9 times out of 10, only took money called script, which is basically money that's only good here in town. If I'm from Tuckerton and I tried to bring my Tuckerton money to Smithville, it would be no good. So because this was the way that the farm owners paid their workers, it didn't make any sense to have, say, 5 kids at home with me while my husband went to go do this because he couldn't send any money back home to us in Philly that we could use. So you would just bring the whole family and live off this script money and buy everything you need from the company store in the village. So these 2 pictures are from Double Trouble. If you came with the whole family, that could be 2 kids, 6 kids, whatever, you get this little cottage, but you only get half. If you look, this isn't the best angle, but there are 2 front doors on this building. That's because it's supposed to hold 2 families. It's a duplex. So even if you have 6, 7 kids, you get half of that little cottage. There's no kitchen because there was a company, a village cook, that made 3 meals a day, at least at Double Trouble, for everybody working and living in the village. So there's no kitchen, there's no running water. These all came with a cute little outhouse, most of which have fallen apart at Double Trouble, unfortunately. But there's no plumbing, there's nothing like that. In the middle, there was just a fireplace that both families would share on opposite sides of the wall that split your halves of the cottage up. But that's really it. It's a room for mom and dad, a room for the kids, and a room that's like a living room area with the fireplace in it. If you came as a single man, you would live in the bunkhouse or the barracks house, called that because of what the living conditions were like. The one at Double Trouble could hold approximately 24 people, maybe 30 if you really jammed them in there. But they were all bunk beds inside. Again, same situation, no running water, there's an outhouse, and no kitchen because that communal cook is going to feed you all your meals. So who were the workers? The workers were men and women and a lot of children. So when I was doing this research, I found a report from a woman who worked for a really early children's rights organization that was also part of the temperance movement. She wrote this really detailed report in the late 1920s about the conditions that a bunch of children were being forced to live in while their families were here working the cranberry bogs. She recorded children as young as 5 years old working in the bogs. The cranberry scoop was usually reserved for adults because it really hurts your back. It's really heavy, but women would use them pretty often. If their husbands got tired and needed a break, just hand them to the missus. Families would be assigned a plot in the bog. So if we go back to one of these pictures, see how everybody's kind of in their own little group, and over here there's another group, over here there's another group. That's pretty much the system. You'd get a little plot for your family that day. The foreman would tell you where to go, and you would also get a little voucher that you would fill out at the end of the day saying how many bushels and pecks or, boxes, if they went that way, of berries that you picked, and you'd be paid according to how many you picked. So there's no like, okay, women on this side of the bog, kids under 16, pick this area. There's nothing like that. It's just take your whole family to this little square and see what you can do. And that's your whole work day. So older family members would usually watch babies that were too young to help. But women, again, were just as involved as the men. Rain would usually delay or sometimes cancel the workday, which I can imagine would have been pretty nice. But if it rained in the morning, there was one record that said the foreman would make them wait an hour or 2 hours for the rain to dry, and then they would just send you out to the bog anyway, because that's a whole day of picking lost otherwise. If the food was not provided by a communal cook, at some of the bogs, there was a baker that would come from Philly once a week with a bread truck and a couple of odds and ends, and if you wanted to, you could buy off of that baker who came into the village once a week. But for the most part, there was this communal cook system. Sanitation, this woman from the Temperance Brigade, she was big on this issue. Double Trouble had a shower house. It was split in half. There were 2 shower stalls for men and 2 for women. The only difference was on the ladies' side, there was a wash basin for doing laundry, because we always seem to get the good jobs to do like that. But the interesting thing at Double Trouble was that nobody really liked using the shower house. It was a mandated thing in the late 30s. Around that time in the country, the book, The Jungle is coming out. We're learning a lot more about germs. So the state came in and said you have to have a shower facility if you're going to have these people living here for like 3 months at a time. But the families that came down were usually the same families every year. So they'd come back, and by the time this happened, the people that were coming down were used to bathing in the Cedar Creek. So that's what they kept doing. They just did not see the point of a shower building. But at a lot of other bogs, there was nothing like that at all. It was just, if it rains, go send your kid to stand out in it if you're that concerned about it. But a lot of them had not showered. When this surveyor was going around the state, she met, I think she said she talked to a 15-year-old girl who said she hadn't bathed in 5 weeks or so. So the sanitation really varied, but some places like Double Trouble had those mandated shower houses. So this is the hub of Philly that was sending the majority of Italian migrant workers. In this area, Market Street and 9th, there's still a massive Italian market there, but this is where most of them came from. In Italian, the folks that would come from Italy just to work the season, they're called ritornati, which means those who come back. It just means they would go to America for the 3 months, make their money, and then go back to Italy. But most of them lived here in Philly, and it's still a major pocket of Italian American citizens. Towns like Vineland were founded by the same folks. Vineland was actually purchased with the intention of being a site for seasonal migrant workers, and then a town just sprang up around it. These folks were coming from the south, where my family is from, and in the southern part of Italy, agriculture is really the big thing. So this is what these folks already knew how to do, and towns like Vineland were growing grapes, and if there's one thing we're really good at, it's wine. So my husband makes his own every year. Just saying, we don't even charge. So this is where they were coming from, and this is where a lot of the southwestern towns that we associate with Italian heritage, like Hamilton, for example, this is how they started. Somebody saw a market for Italian migrant seasonal workers, and they would build their own little villages to make their living that way. This is just the distribution of them nowadays. Okay, so foremen and the owners, the people a little bit higher up on the totem pole in the whole system. This gentleman on the left is Commodore Edward Crabbe of Toms River. He was the owner of the Double Trouble Cranberry Company. He's the one that built the village at Double Trouble. Before that, it was still a cranberry operation. There was one there. There had been two brothers that planted the bogs, but it's a really long story. The guy before Mr. Crabbe here, he couldn't really decide what he wanted to do for a living. He was a Civil War vet, and he came home and he didn't really know what to do. So he ran for mayor of Toms River at one point. He tried politics. He decided to be a lawyer. He went into agriculture for a second, and he planted these bogs. His name was Gowdy. And then he just, I guess, couldn't wait for the crops to kind of come to fruition and see if there was good money in it. So he sells the property to Ed Crabbe, who forms the whole company and builds the village. And he has a foreman up here in the circle is Alfie Musumeci. This guy had a really cool job. He meets Ed Crabbe in Philadelphia. At the time, he is running a limousine cab company. He would drive the wealthy elite around Philadelphia when they were there in the summertime, but he didn't really have a lot to do in the fall. So then he meets this guy who's starting an agricultural business for a fall fruit, and he says, "You're looking for seasonal workers. How are you going to get them to your farm?" And Ed Crabbe kind of says, "Well, I hadn't really thought about that. Do you have something in mind?" And Alfie then says, "I have a limo company. These cars can fit a lot of people. I can drive these people back and forth from Philly to middle of nowhere South Jersey for you." So that's what he does. That's how he gets involved with the Double Trouble Cranberry Company. And that's how the workers get to the village every single year. A lot of times in other bogs, they would take the train to the nearest New Jersey station, and then somebody from the company, the farm company, would bring a car back and forth all day to pick the workers up and bring them to the village. But Double Trouble, they arrived in style in really long limousines that held a lot of people. This is just a good picture to kind of demonstrate how different life was for the people that were not migrant workers. This is a shared house for the foreman, for Alfie here, and for the cook. It doesn't really look like it in this picture, but this is a pretty big house. It's L-shaped, like this. It has a huge wraparound porch. There's a full-size basement. It had 2 outhouses, which was a really big deal. The cook and the foreman got to live in this, like, a little bit of a nicer situation because they were making a little bit more money and they were in positions of authority. So the cook did not cook in that house, by the way. He had a whole completely outdoor operation at Double Trouble. People that visited the area And the ladies who worked in the packing house, who we're going to see in a minute, if you asked them in the 1950s anything about Double Trouble, they would say, oh yeah, it always smells like tomato sauce, because the Italian cook was cooking for the Italian workers outside in a big pot. So there was a stereotype that the village always smelled like sauce, which I think sounds great. It sounds like Sunday at my mom's, but anyway. So this is the packing house at Double Trouble on the left, and on the right, this is the one at White's Bog. The packing house was really where the berries get ready to go to market. It's where they get sorted, cleaned a little bit, and packed up. And the people that sorted the berries in the packing house were almost exclusively women. The ladies here were all local. Unlike the migrant workers, they lived kind of right down the street. This industry was so lucrative for South Jersey that for the fall season through the 30s, 40s, 50s, right up until about 1968, county highways would completely shut down to the public just so that the trucks transporting the cranberries from the packing houses to the marketplace could get through faster. Because this is a really short season, but it's incredibly lucrative for the entire state. It brings in a lot of money. So everybody kind of wanted to get in on it while they could for the season. So this is the fall time. Kids are in school, although a lot of them would kind of take the fall off to help their parents with the cranberrying. But these ladies had a really great opportunity to make some money for their households or for themselves if they wanted to by sorting the berries in the packing house. So the system goes like this. The folks in the bog do the dry harvest before the wet harvest method. They pick the berries by hand or with that scoop. They take truckloads, put them on a truck. The truck then brings them to the basement level of the packing house, which is actually, it's over here and down the hill in Double Trouble, but they are then put on a freight elevator. There's a sign here that says no riding from, I think, 1907, because apparently this became an issue. Too many workers thought they could use it as an elevator for themselves and broke it. So the berries get put on a freight elevator. There's the basement level, the ground level, and then there's a third floor above this. They go from the basement to the top floor, and the reason they skip the middle is it has to do with the way that we tell if cranberries are ripe, which was, like so many things that were great discoveries, found out completely by accident. There was another cranberry bog in Jackson, and there was a gentleman working there by the name of John Webb, but everybody called him Peg Leg Webb. He was an amputee. He had fought in the Civil War and had to have his leg below the knee removed. So he walked with a peg leg. Everybody called him Peg Leg Webb, which isn't very nice, but I swear it's relevant. He was in his packing house, and he had a big crate full of cranberries. He was trying to get down the stairs, and that peg leg that he had kind of slipped out from under him. He drops the whole box, and he notices something really weird. The good berries that are ripe and nice and red and ready to go to market, they bounce all the way to the bottom of the stairs, and the bad berries that were still kind of green or had a little bit of rot on them, they don't go more than like 3 steps down the staircase. So he discovers completely by accident that good berries bounce. If you go to the store today around Thanksgiving and you buy a bag full of cranberries, if you drop one on your counter, it should bounce in about 4 or 5 different directions before it falls behind your counter, never to be seen again. Not that I would know. Last year there was a little bit of a fiasco, but those berries were really, really ripe. So what they do is they make machinery that acts like big mechanical staircases to bounce the berries down. They basically model entire industrial grade equipment off of this guy's tragic accident. So they go from the basement to the top floor because they need to be bounced down to the second floor. So what they do, the workers, usually a man, would take the crates at the top floor and dump them into the top of a machine called a hopper. And then the berries just kind of fall down this mechanical staircase that goes like this and dumps them to the next step. If they have enough oomph to bounce over a little rubber barrier, they go down the conveyor belt, which you can see on the right here, double trouble, and then they get hand sorted by these ladies on the conveyor belt. That method of bouncing them caught about 80% of the bad berries. So it's weird, but it worked pretty well. So the ladies here, their job is to sort out that 20% of the not so good ones that made it through. And then, okay, we have to talk about Ocean Spray. So Ocean Spray started as the Ocean Spray Preserving Company in 1912. They made a cranberry sauce. Around the same time, a few years later, this lady, Elizabeth Lee, is making something like a cranberry paste, something like a chutney. There's also, they realize they have a product in common. Nobody else is really doing it, so they merge. And then eventually they also partner with this gentleman on the right, John Makepeace. And they form this co-op called the Cranberry Cranners Incorporated. Eventually, they changed the name to Ocean Spray, and then the National Cranberry Association in 1946. These guys are in competition with the American Cranberry Exchange. This is a much bigger sort of thing, but that's what the Double Trouble Cranberry Company was selling to. They were part of the American Cranberry Exchange. So if you think about today, when we think of cranberries, I think of Ocean Spray pretty much immediately. They're almost synonymous at this point. But these three independent farmers beat out this international, this national conglomerate of other farmers in a co-op. And now we have Ocean Spray Craisins, white cranberry juice, which is fine, I guess. Anyway, there are varieties of berries. If I asked anybody in this room to run down to the store and buy me an apple, you would probably ask me, what? You'd ask me, exactly, you'd ask me what kind. So cranberries, apparently, I don't want to say theoretically because I'm not a berry farmer, but apparently cranberries have different varieties with different tastes. If you've ever bitten into one raw, I don't think you're going to have the taste buds left to distinguish between the Jersey Belle and an Arbutus. They're just bitter. They're really, really bitter. But there are different varieties, and if nothing else, even if you're not a connoisseur and you can't taste the difference, this is a good marketing strategy. So the American Cranberry Exchange marketed under the name Eat More Cranberries. They left the E off, so it's really subtle and not so in your face. But they sold all these different varieties. These are all different posters for different cranberry varieties. At Double Trouble, they were selling the darker varieties, which were actually out of these, it was just the Jersey Belle and the Quail. But it was part of those ladies on the conveyor belt's job to kind of sort them into different varieties based on their color. Apparently, the darker the berry, I guess slightly sweeter it tastes. I'm not really sure how it works, but these are all original advertisements for them. I love this slide. Cranberries were shipped overseas en masse during World War II because they really are an American classic item for the holidays for us, and it's almost a uniquely American thing. They're native to New England, New Jersey. The Native Americans ate them. And so Ocean Spray thinks about this and realizes like, oh, what would be a really nice thing to send the guys and gals overseas that is really going to be something from home. And they ask local farmers to give a certain percentage of their berries over to Ocean Spray to send overseas to troops. Most of these guys were in the Pacific. I think 2 of them were in Guadalcanal. But it says here, we cranberry growers can't carry a gun in this war, but we can help to feed the boys who do carry the guns. And there's one of them that says, I can't see it very well. My first Christmas dinner in Hawaii was really complete with cranberry sauce. This one at the bottom says, I never enjoyed cranberry sauce more in my life than I did while in the Hawaiian Islands. So I don't think it says here, oh, 25% of every cranberry grower's crop was asked to go overseas. So that's really cool. This is what we have today. The wet harvest method, like I said, came from the necessity to pick up all those berries that the scoop had knocked onto the ground and sell them and make the money. So originally, when they would flood the bogs, they had these machines called beaters that do pretty much just that. They're almost pushed like lawnmowers. And they have these little rotors that go around and hit the berries just hard enough to knock them off their vines. And then once they're loose, they just float to the surface. Today, one machine can do pretty much everything. This is also the method that rendered the packing houses pretty much obsolete. So all those ladies that would come to sort the berries for the fall months, kind of put them out of work for that time of the year at least. And all the workers that work the machinery in the packing houses, same kind of situation. By the way, if you go to Double Trouble and you get a tour, some of the machinery still runs, and if your tour guide is Andrew, which it probably will be because he's the historian there, he will run them for you sometimes. And he will also tell you some really great stories about the ladies on the conveyor belt. Because their floor was pretty much girls only, they would, well, first of all, they would sing a lot. We have, there's a lot of videos of them singing together. They would sing church hymns because they mostly knew each other from church. But as soon as they stopped doing that, apparently they would tell some really, really raunchy jokes. And a lot of times it was at their husband's expense because they weren't around. So some of them were written down and wow. They had a good time at work. So this closing the packing houses was really kind of a shame. But now we have these machineries. You can see the little buoy system that kind of corrals the berries once they're on the bog surface. And then they go up this little conveyor belt here. This is kind of a top-down view of it. They go up the conveyor belt. This whole thing kind of shakes, and it does the job of that staircase that they used to bounce down in the hoppers. And then this one big machine can even sort the berries and grab all the chaff, the stuff that you don't want out of it. A whole bog can be done by like 6 people in a matter of hours now, so the whole system is really streamlined. Today, well actually, I made this last year, so it might be a little out of date, but as of 2023, the leading states in production in order are Wisconsin, Massachusetts, Washington, Oregon, and then us, New Jersey, all the way in 5th place. But in our defense, all those states are a lot bigger than us, so we did it first. That's not true, Massachusetts did it first, but we can ignore it for now. This has also become a really profitable international crop. Not surprisingly, a lot of berries come from Canada now. The last bag I bought at Walmart was actually Canadian. But surprisingly, some southern places such as Chile are really big producers, and they can do it while the U.S. farms are not producing because they're in the opposite climate to us. So a lot of really far-flung nations contribute to the industry today. But that's all I got, so thank you, and keep on bouncing.
Questions for Julia?
Yes.
Do you remember one of the jokes?
I
Okay, we got a question,
can
Julia.
repeat it on county time, but
What's the origin of the name Double Trouble?
oh, this is one of my favorite. I'm so glad somebody asked. So Double Trouble has been owned and operated for a couple different industries, beginning with the lumber industry of Atlantic white cedar since the 1690s. The name Double Trouble is on maps dating back to around the 1720s, and it goes back to that lumber industry. Actually, I might have to check that date, but the 1700s, there are maps that already show it as being called Double Trouble. But during the time of the Atlantic white cedar industry, which was another one of South Jersey's major lucrative businesses, the system kind of worked with a method of floodgates. So Atlantic white cedar likes to grow where it's really swampy and marshy, but if there's too much water, they die. So the folks that would do the logging, they had these systems where they'd have a mill pond that was sometimes man-made, and then they'd carve out these little channels with dams that they could control. And one day, the story goes, in the 1700s, one of the dams broke in a major storm, and it just flooded over. So the foreman said, "We have trouble here," and so they fixed it really quickly overnight. And then overnight, the native beaver population came in, and they chewed a hole through the man-made dam. They wanted the logs for themselves. So the foreman said, 12 hours later, now we have Double Trouble, and the name has stuck ever since. It's debated whether it was a beaver or a muskrat because both do live there. Although I've only ever seen the muskrats in person when I was there. I never got to see the beavers, but if you're there and you walk the trails, you'll see teeth marks in any birch tree that you see. It's all chewed. They're still a major part of the park. So the name Double Trouble comes from either a beaver or a muskrat. Any other questions?
I got one Double Trouble story.
Okay, great.
My mom and my aunts and uncles, my mom was like 1 of 10, and all of them worked at Double Trouble, but on the other end of the operation, the blueberry farming operation. And that's how they earn money for shoes and clothes for school. That's the only way they could get the money. And my mom and my aunts, till the day they died, would be complaining about Mr. Crab would never let them work in the sorting house. So that was something that was going on. So in the summer they were harvesting blueberries, and in the fall they were doing cranberries, so they had 2 cash crops. Okay, so if we could stand and Don could